Welcome to the Greg Tompsett Sports Show, where tonight we're going to get a little bit nerdy. We're going to talk a little bit about the Buffalo Bills salary cap situation. There's a lot of fun things going on in the world of sports. Obviously, the U.S. Open going on right now, one of the more fun. I usually enjoy the U.S. Open. It's always on Father's Day. There's always a lot of fun things going on with being able to go golfing with your dad or anything like that. And honestly, I love the U.S. Open because it's usually the most humbling of the golf tournaments. And you see guys, there was a great shot on Thursday where a guy chipped it, I think out of a sand trap, all the way across the green, and it rolled back all the way back across the green to him back into the rough. Is fantastic. I just love to see like pros who are amazing and can do things that most of us could never even dream of, be humbled and shoot like 9 over. Unfortunately, this U.S. Open, they're playing awesome and people are like 10 under and things like that. That's not fun. I like when like only 1 or 2 guys are under par. So tonight's show is going to focus on the Buffalo Bills and our salary cap situation. We had a awesome suggestion from one of our Cover One premium members, Adam D. Adam's always really great. He's done some exercises in the past representing the Bills in the Reddit, the NFL Reddit mock off season, and is very savvy with some of the draft and salary cap moves. And he asked me a question as a suggestion for a show of, hey, we know Brandon Beane has been very creative the last couple years in contracts he's structured, how he's created salary cap space, restructuring of existing contracts, use of void years, pushing things out into the future. How much of that future has he mortgaged? How much of that future has he, kind of taken advantage of and put us into a spot where we are, going to have to pay for that down the line? So I thought it was a really great question. And I'm going to try to go through a couple different layers. I'm going to try not to get too nerdy. There are a couple things I'm going to bring up. Our friends, Jason Fitzgerald's site at overthecap.com is my favorite. It's the most accurate. I like Mike and his site over at Spot Track as well. They do a nice job. I think Jason is super precise with the work that he does at Over the Cap. So both of the sites are very good reference points. I prefer to use overthecap.com. So we're going to use that tonight. And I'm going to go through a couple different kind of layers of how to get into that and try not to get too deep into the numbers, but we'll do a little bit of that as well. First, I'm going to talk about just the salary cap in general. And, obviously there's lots of people who joke all the time about the salary cap as a myth and it's fake. And I will say Bills fans are now getting closer to that, where for a long time, it was pretty much most of the NFL over here being fairly conservative in how they approach things, and then pretty much just Mickey Loomis down in New Orleans like bending that thing off and like breaking it and figuring out all the different ways you can manipulate the cap to push money out into the future, and hey, I'll deal with it then. Now you're seeing a lot more of the NFL realize that that's probably more available to them than what they had realized previously, and that it's more doable than how scary that seemed previously. So now the Buffalo Bills specifically, and for anybody who had a chance this morning to catch my segment with Joe Marino on Locked On Bills, Joe asked me, we're talking about the good, the bad, and the reality of Brandon Beane. He asked me for the most underrated part of Brandon Beane's game. And I said it was his full usage of the entire toolbox of salary cap tips and tricks, and that we now do everything. There is no mechanism that other teams take advantage of that we don't. There is no like separate extra trick that we don't utilize to add talent to this team. He now has opened up the full spectrum of every single little salary cap manipulation, and all those years as Bills fans that we had to listen to Tom Donahoe or Russ Brandon or Buddy Nix carry the water for, got rest his soul, but Ralph Wilson and his cash to cap ratio, and that, in Buffalo, we have to play by different rules because we just don't have the same kind of market as these other places. God bless Terry Pagula. He cuts those checks. We have absolutely no difference than anybody in LA or Chicago or New York or any other market. Dallas, Jerry Jones does not cut more checks than Terry Pagula. Terry Pagula has actually spent the most cash, or second most cash, in the last 3 years of any team in the NFL. He cuts every check Brandon Beane asked for. So as we do that, and we are taking advantage of all those tips and tricks, I'm now going to dive in a little bit into, okay, what does that mean right now? And what kind of position does that put us in? So our first dive into the nerdy numbers here. Hopefully this isn't too small for you guys. Awesome producer Chris and I messed around before the show trying to make it as reasonably visible as possible. It's a lot of numbers. We'll try to do our best here and make it as big as we can for everybody. So as we go through and look at these, it is going to show each of the different spots that we have. So right now, the current cap is, right there. And I think most teams have it at like 225, 228, whatever it might be for this year. And it puts us into a spot where with this year's current spot, the 226.9, I think is the official number. We have the 5.4 million in cap space. So that seems pretty good. Hey, we must be doing all right. Well, one thing you can look for, and if you're trying to do this yourself, trying to figure out, hey, where are the leverage contracts? Where are the ones where we've really kicked a lot of money into the future? You can look at hey, how much dead money would be involved in moving on from that contract. That tells you there's a lot of future stuff coming, and we've paid them a lot more cash than what they're counting against the cap. And that's the simplest way to think about the difference between salary cap and why people think it's fake. It's not that it's fake. I'm going to pull this down again for a second. It's not that it's fake. It's that you have a lot of options of when you want to pay for it, when you want to account for it. So for anyone who's not an accounting major or isn't an accountant and doesn't live in the world of debits and credits and gets confused balancing a checkbook, that's all the salary cap is. So when you pay a player cash, eventually you have to account for every dollar of that cash. Anytime there's opportunity to reduce a salary cap hit, it's because you haven't paid the player cash yet. So we'll use a player like DeAndre Hopkins. The reason that the Arizona Cardinals couldn't really trade him is because they had already paid him a ton of cash. I think for him, it was money in 2020, 2021, and 2022 that got kicked down the road, and that they paid him, I think between those 3 years, I think it was like $72 million over the 3 years. They paid him a pretty healthy chunk of money. They had accounted for about 50 million of that. So they had, kind of credited 50 million in those years. They still had $22 million in salary cap hits that they didn't, take credit for, or they didn't count against their cap during those years. They used prorated bonuses and void years and kick things out into the future. So some people were confused in that, hey, is there money that they still owe him and that could help it out? Or like, does that dead cap go to a new team? And neither of those are the case. It was simply that the Cardinals hadn't paid for in a salary cap sense. Think about it like your credit card, that, you could buy $72 worth of stuff. And if you pay off the $50 worth of it, you still have the thing. You already ate the meal. You already went to the concert, and you still owe the $22. You got to pay for it at some point. That check is still going to be due. You could spread it out. You could kick it down the road. You could transfer the balance to another credit card, but you still owe the money at some point. So the way that they were doing that was simply that they had to account for that because they hadn't paid it off on the salary cap yet, and they had to eat that and then trade him away. So when we go back and look at the Buffalo Bills, you can look at some of those kind of guys. Obviously, in case you guys are wondering, I'm going to take a really strong stance here. I don't think the Bills are going to trade Josh Allen. Call me crazy. I don't care who here doesn't believe me. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that the Buffalo Bills aren't going to trade Josh Allen. The reason that they're not going to trade Josh Allen is that to trade him, they would have to eat $120 million in dead cap. So that gives you an idea right now for a player of Josh Allen's status, who is by our books, a $46 million a year quarterback. We're only counting 18 million this year. We only counted about that, like 17 million in change last year. So there's still $120 million we haven't accounted for yet in cash that we've paid him. That tells you how much is already kicked down the road for Josh Allen. Some of the shorter deals, you can see some of the other pieces. And I can change this. If I change it to like after June 1st, people will look at me, oh, well, that's way lower. All that does is kick some of that money into next year. That dead cap doesn't go anywhere. That dead cap has to be accounted for. If I split half of it, so for this Josh Allen, I just changed it to after June 1st, it goes to 64 million. If I go back to pre-June 1st, it goes back to the 120 million. That other roughly $56 million, it just got kicked into next year. It doesn't disappear. So when people talk about at post June 1st is this like magic get out of jail free card, all that is let's call it the equivalent of like a zero APR balance transfer that, hey, you can kick a chunk of that money into next year and then deal with it then, but you still owe that money. You still have to pay it off. Some other guys here, the easiest way to look for it is, hey, where are the big numbers in this column with more dead cap than what we're accounting for? So when people, most often Giants fans and weirdly Cowboys fans, that were convincing themselves that they were about to trade for Stephon Diggs, the reason we weren't is because it would account for $45 million in dead cap. Now, whether we ate a chunk of that this year and kick some of it into next year, which if we switched it to post June 1st, oh, look, it's only $13 million in dead cap. We could pretty much pretend like we were just paying him not to be on the team. Well, if we did that, $31 million would go into next year, and we would pay $13 million this year and $31 million next year for Stephon Diggs to not be on the team. So that's why that wasn't feasible, but that shows you some of the things we've already leveraged into the future. Some other ones, you see guys like, hey, Von Miller only counts 7.9 million. We have 40 million still to be accounted for Von Miller. Matt Milano only counts 7 million. We have $35 million we still have to account for in the future with Matt Milano. The same thing, Dawson Knox, there's future money. Ed Oliver, we just took him from 10.8 down to 4.9. That sounds great, but all that did was kick money into the future. At some point, we have to account for this $23 million from Ed Oliver, and so on and so forth. You go all the way down. I'm going to pick out one more because it's a good example in the short term, and it is one of our newest players, Leonard Floyd. So Leonard Floyd is an example of a contract that the Bills never used to do, where they're paying him $7 million. He has some escalators where he could earn an extra like $500,000 for 8, 10, and 12 sacks. He could make his way up to $9 million. I think it's $500,000 for 8 sacks, $500,000 more for 10 sacks, and $1 million more for 12 sacks. And he'd get $9 million total and an extra $2 million if he were to hit those escalators and go up to $9 million. But he's guaranteed $7 million. Well, he only accounts for $2.6 million against the cap this year. So that sounds great. Oh my gosh, we got a 9 to 10 sack a year guy for $2.6 million. Well, it's because we spread all that money out into the future. If we don't extend him, we have to pay for the rest of that next year, which is roughly the remaining $4.5 million, 4.376. There's two different scenarios where the way Brandon Beane has done that in the past has helped us, and one where it kind of bit us in the butt. Those two examples are Matt Milano and Jordan Phillips. So if you look at, if I scroll down here a little bit, we should see some of our dead cap. If you look, you're going to see that some of the names are guys that obviously aren't on the roster from last year. We're doing pretty good. We only have $5 million in dead cap. That's actually very, very good. That means that Brandon Beane hasn't wasted a lot of money here in 2023. You have the little bit from Roger Saffold last year. I'm going to skip this one. A little from O.J. Howard, some Matt Hawk, Isaiah McKenzie, Zach Moss, obviously the Matt Araiza situation, and Luke Tenuta. So those guys, we paid them some money in guarantees last year, and some of it got kicked into this year because we cut them at cut down day, or we spread out some money into the future. One of them, people might be confused. Hey, why is Jordan Phillips down here in dead cap when he's on the roster? Well, when you have a guy who has void years in his contract, and then what a void year is it's a future year in a contract that you don't actually intend for the player to play out. A lot of times it doesn't even have a contract tied to a salary tied to it, because in the language of the contract, it says, hey, this is a 3-year deal, but if not extended prior to March 15th, this contract will void on March 14th. And that's usually the day before the first day of the new league year in the spring when free agency starts. So for Jordan Phillips, we didn't extend him ahead of time proactively. So we had to let the contract void. The way that it voided, we had to eat this $1.25 million dead cap hit. We couldn't spread it out anymore or use any of the other void years. And then he became a free agent for a little while. I think he was a free agent for maybe 2 weeks. And then he signed back with the Bills, but we already had eaten that dead cap money plus what we paid him this year. So if we scroll up and find him, Jordan Phillips is right here. He counts for 2.8 million, but he really counts for about 4 million, almost 4.1, because it's the 2.8 million that we're paying him now, plus the 1.25 that we paid, that we had to eat for earlier in the offseason. So the good side of that, let's use another one, is what we did with Matt Milano. So Matt Milano right here only counts 7 million. Well, he signed a nice extension that pays him more money than that in his contract. His original was 4 years and 41 million. His new contract obviously was an extension on top of that and pays him additional money. I think the new one was an average of 14.1 million. So the reason it only counts 7 million is we did a restructure last year. When we did the restructure, we added multiple void years onto Matt Milano's contract. If we had let him leave as a free agent or didn't extend him, his contract would have voided after this season. We would have eaten dead cap, and then he would have gone as a free agent. Well, instead, obviously, Aaron and I have talked about it on other shows where, I don't know exactly what the Bills were thinking, but there's a decent line of thought to say that they might have been planning on letting Matt Milano move on with the outside linebackers they had drafted and extend Tremaine Edmunds. Well, instead, Edmunds kind of priced himself out, and Matt Milano went up another level and played as an all-pro. So instead, they said, hey, Matt, why don't we take those void years and turn them into real contract extension years? Well, what that does is it lets you keep spreading that money out into the future. So instead of accelerating the money that they had restructured last year, and all of it would have been due this year to count as a big bloated cap hit, they continued to spread it out. In this new one, they even added on an extra void year in 2027 to maximize the full 5 years they can spread out any money. So that shows the two ends of the spectrum of where, hey, if things don't work out exactly right, you could pay extra for a player like we did with Jordan Phillips. Or if they work out really well, you can restructure and extend a guy and be able to spread it out even further into the future. I would say some candidates for that next year could be, we could do that with Taron Johnson, is a guy I could see us doing a restructure where we could knock down his money even further if we need a little bit now, and then next year we turn it into a real extension. And I think Deion Dawkins is another candidate for that, where we could knock his money down even further and then next year turn it into a real extension if he has a nice season. Those are two pretty obvious ones for me. We'll talk about Tre'Davious White in another situation later. He has a pretty enticing restructure number that would save us some money. I think they want to see him play well, but I will say reports from guys like Sal Capaccio and Alex Brasky and guys that we trust have been pretty encouraging, and it sounds like he's doing well, so maybe that's more in play. So that's how we got to this situation now. We have a lot of guys that I pointed out, again, Von Miller, Matt Milano, Dawson Knox, Ed Oliver. Those four players in reality are $60 million players in their average salary in the way that they do things. And instead, they're going to count us as about 24 million. So that's a good example. Just those four players, their actual average salary is 60 million between the four of them. And the four of them are right now are accounting for 24 million, 25-ish. So that shows you some of the money we've kicked into the future. So let me pull this down real quick. Let's go look at that future. So the next things we want to look at, I'm going to do a little bit on where that puts us for the free agents coming up next year. So the first thing we want to look at is, okay, what things are we looking at? You'll see a couple different things from a salary cap standpoint. I right now agree with the estimate that Over the Cap has. SpotTrack has it at like 241 million. That's like a 13 or 14 million dollar increase. I think it's going to be much, much higher than that, maybe double where that is. SpotTrack has it at 256 million. That's the number that I'm expecting. So even with that 256 million, we're getting pretty close there to the cap. I'll show you how we can play with it. And here are some of the names of players that are not under contract for next year. So you see Micah Hyde, Leonard Floyd, who we just added, Daquan Jones, Tim Settle. I'm okay with that one. I wouldn't mind one of Tim Settle or Jordan Phillips, but I'd like Daquan Jones back. I'd also like Poona Ford back. Tyler Medikevich is probably a guy we can let go. Dane Jackson's been valuable depth. Terrell Dodson, David Edwards. We'll see how Damian Harris does, but I'm excited about Damian Harris and Taylor Rapp and Trent Sherfield. All of them are free agents. I don't mind one of AJ Epinesa or Shaq Lawson as a rotational fourth defensive end. They're both free agents. Just added Latavius Murray, Brandon Shell. Just you're seeing the kind of depth that are all free agents. Also a big one here with the decision, Gabriel Davis is not on the salary cap right now. So some sizable names of guys that I think we expect to contribute. This column here is a good one. It shows the snap count percentage. Look at some of the snap counts of the players and how much they played last year and some of the guys that are coming up as upcoming free agents. So there's some sizable guys. We'll see how much they play for us this year, but there's certainly a fair amount that's going to be able to need to be accounted for on top of what is out there and already counting against our cap. So let's go into that view next. So this tool is a neat one that I like on overthecap.com, and it is one that they call their salary cap calculator. All right, speak amongst yourselves for a moment. I need to take a drink of water. Okay, so with the salary cap calculator, again, you can see that number here that I reference. I agree with this number. If I was projecting it, I'd have it in the 254 to 258 range. So they're right in the middle of that at 256. I think that's spot on. That's the kind of increase I'm expecting at somewhere close to like 26 to 30 million dollars. I think it's going to be a really big jump with all of the new TV money and gambling money and all the different things there. So now that right there, we are $25 million over the cap. We are $25 million over the cap without all those guys that I mentioned before. So I'm going to pause real quick here. I'm going to stop sharing this and take a moment to reassure you, because I just said that and I probably freaked out some Bills fans like, oh my gosh, you just rattled off a dozen players that we need and we're $25 million over the cap. If I rewind and take you back to, let's say March 1st of this year, and we just finished a lovely Valentine's Day. We're now getting into March. You're getting ready for your St. Patrick's Day celebrations. The Buffalo Bills were $18 million over the salary cap and had a huge list of free agents coming up. They fixed the $18 million over the salary cap. They brought back Jordan Poyer. They brought back multiple contributing players to the roster, and then they added 16 new players onto the roster. So I'm going to go through some different things to show you how that's possible. But the reason I know it's possible is we literally just did it. We just did it. We were 18 million over. We retained a ton of really important players that we brought back, and we added 16 new players. So it's very, very doable. And now I'm going to show you why, even though some of the numbers are scary, we still have plenty of options going into the future. All right, back to our spreadsheet of numbers here. So again, next year, I'm expecting 256. If it comes in well below that, we're extra screwed, but so is everybody else in the league. So it's not like it hurts us extra. It's just other challenges we have to deal with. So we're $25 million over the cap to start with. What do we do? Well, the first one is Josh Allen. And I'm torn on Josh Allen because at some point we have to stop kicking the money down the road. At some point, we simply have to take our medicine and we have to just deal with the fact that, hey, we got to eat one of these years and just leave it like it is and have a really big cap number and deal with it. My guess is that year is 2025. 2025, when he's 29 years old, I think that's the year that we just pay the roster bonus. We keep it as is. We count probably like a $56 million cap hit that year and just ride it out. Like at some point we need to, because each year that you restructure this, you're adding money to the future that can't be undone. So right now, if we restructure it, it's $23 million. We pretty much have to. We need to wait until we get some of the older players on the roster that their number simply comes off and they ride off into the sunset and are no longer on the team. But right off the bat, that's going to be the first one I do because, again, the reason you do this is Josh Allen isn't going anywhere. He's not gonna go anywhere that hurts us. He's going to be a part of this team for a long, long time. So the risk is so low and we can play around with those numbers. So I'm going to restructure that one. It immediately knocks it down. And hey, look, we're only $2 million over the cap. Hooray. So each of those decisions now come up with subsequent additional players. So there are obviously here an important part that I like what Jason does with the site here. He shows the age and the accrued season. So you talk about the kind of players that we're discussing here are ones that are starting to get up there and have played for several seasons. Many of these are just simply going to be self-fulfilling. They are going to play in a manner that makes this decision pretty easy. The one that I think is going to be the easiest is Tre'Davious White. If Tre'Davious White is still a little hesitant, not ready to put his foot in the ground and explode and cut on balls, and isn't making the plays on the ball that we saw in his all-pro seasons and when he was, one of the top 5 corners in the NFL, then we're probably going to just let this continue to roll and just deal with it as it expires. And we'll cross that bridge when we're ready to have that discussion of, hey, is Trey White ready to move to safety, or do we just kind of let him play out the last year of his deal in 2025 and we'll go from there? However, if he plays really well in 2023 this year and he gets back to, let's say, a Pro Bowl or all pro level, he becomes a very obvious extension or renegotiation player that we could kick extra money down the road and be able to spread that out. Some of the players that Deion Dawkins is the exact same. I think Deion Dawkins is another player where I could see us do that and be able to spread some of his money out into the future or do an extension, and that we would simply go in and extend him a couple years out if he's still playing at a good starting caliber tackle level. I don't know that he's going to become an all-pro, but Deion Dawkins is a good tackle. I think he is a Pro Bowl level tackle where he can be the 3rd or the 4th best tackle in the AFC. And if he is, we'll do 2 more years of that at, maybe $15 million a year. That's totally fine. You could extend him, be able to do that, and be in a perfectly good spot. I'm not going to mess around with projecting what it would be, but roughly $15 million a year. I'm simply going to show the way that we would restructure it. I'll do some savings that way. It would probably be an extension. The players where it's going to be harder are the ones where you start to see, hey, Stephon Diggs is about to go into his age 30 season. We're already paying a pretty good chunk of money. Mitch Morse, we know the potential risks with the concussions. Micah Hyde going into, he's going to be 33 this year. So this would be, if he's still around, his age 34 season. Those are guys where I think you get to the point where you can't mess with that anymore. There's even going to be one lower here. Von Miller is the other obvious one. Those guys, we'll see. So Stephon Diggs is playing at the highest level of those players, and he may be the kind of guy that could be worthwhile if we go and want to do that. But those are players that I probably want to let that play out, and we'll just take our medicine as it comes up. We'll be able to go through and deal with that when it happens. If we're on a year-by-year basis with 1 more year for Mitch Morse, 1 more year for Micah Hyde, that's totally cool. That perfectly works out for me. We will, keep kicking that can down the road, just like we did with Jordan Poyer. We'll deal with it as it happens. Daquan Jones is a perfect idea that I'm not paying him big money, but I could totally see where he's extended and plays another year at a healthy number where we bring him back and are able to play. I don't want to kick the can further down the road with Von Miller. I'm good with that. We've done it twice already. Now we just got to take our medicine and deal with it as it happens. But you do have some other players like Taron Johnson. Are we at a point where Taron Johnson is ready for an extension? I think he will be. And I think that we're going to be at a point where we do extend him further and are able to add more onto his deal. And you spread some of that out and you do it with, he's going to be the same idea as he was now. He's about an $8 million a year guy. So we'll give him, 2 years at a $16 million deal. But we're going to spread it out plus have 3 void years. We'll go through and set it up that way. We'll spread all the money out. And now all of a sudden we can reduce his number to be able to shrink it down to where it is. So those are some of the players that are there that we can play around with into the future and then be able to get us into a position where now we can actually function and be able to spread some of those out. There's also some guys that probably are going to be coming up on, hey, do we want to cut them? Are we ready to move on? Are we ready to be able to, maybe go another direction? Cutting Nyheim Hines is $5 million. That's one that I could certainly see us do. Cutting Saran Neal is $2.8 million. That's one I could totally see us being able to do. There's multiple players like that where, hey, we're probably at the point where this cap savings is worth more than what keeping the player around would do. And we'd be able to add in some additional movement to be able to create some cap space. And, we'll see where some of those decisions go. For the most part, I think that there's not a ton we don't have any like super easy ones, but we definitely have some players that I could see us moving on from and creating some cap space there. So just the handful of things that I did there without any major changes, all of a sudden we're $15 million under the salary cap for next year with just a handful of extensions and movement. And there's many more we could do. There's a lot of other things if some other players play well that we could play around with the money and be able to move things around. Ed Oliver now is on a longer term deal. You could easily restructure him and create some additional space like we did this year. There's lots of things you could play with to be able to do that. Maybe they're ready to move on, or maybe they trade Ryan Bates and maybe they move him somewhere. There's all kinds of different moves that they could do to be able to create some space and to do some things, to be in a pretty good position to be able to do that without eating a ton of dead money. All of a sudden, boom, you're at almost $20 million in additional cap space to be able to function, bring in the players you want, sign your draft picks. Again, probably another offseason where our biggest splurge this year was a Connor McGovern, where it's like a $6 or $7 million a year guy, and then one more guy like Deontay Hardy, who was like a 3 or 4, and a $7 million pass rusher like Leonard Floyd, and then a whole bunch of $1.77 million contracts. Maybe next year it's $2.1 million, whatever that threshold is under the comp pick formula. Let's say that, whether people are excited about this or not, a possibility is maybe we let Gabe Davis move on, and maybe we're in a position where we let him walk as a comp pick like we did with Tremaine Edmonds this year. And next year we're signing guys to those $1.77 million deals, or again, whatever the number is next year, because we're trying to keep a comp pick for Gabe Davis leaving. So we'll see where that goes, but that's the kind of possibility we would have. Some of the other future years, we haven't really leveraged too much. Most of those are in pretty good shape that we'd be able to do, but I'm going to bring this one back up. This shows, so right now, all the restructures we have, Josh Allen in 2025, again, this is looking at 2 years down the road in 2025, Josh Allen would now have a $62 million deal. His cap number is $62 million. At some point there, we simply have to take our medicine. We simply have to be able to, at some point, just eat that and move on and deal with it and not keep kicking that can down the road. Because at some point towards the end of this, in 2025, there'll be 3 years left on his deal. That might be a point where we're starting to talk about an extension, like a further extension into the future, where we may need to do some other things. And maybe that number at that point, maybe quarterbacks are getting $60 million a year or whatever it might be. So we'll need to figure out where that goes as we come to it. Again, I don't think next year is the year that we take our Josh Allen medicine. I think we do one more restructure or one more movement to be able to create space. But at some point, we're going to have to stop the bleeding and just deal with it and go through there. So we'll figure that out as we get closer to be able to do those different moves. We can potentially talk to Tom Wambsgames and see if the Dirty Brothers are ready to, the Disgusting Brothers are ready to do a deal and maybe go through there. He does like dealing with Greg, so we'll see where that leads us. So obviously those different pieces I shared is trying to show that, hey, I would say some people have asked it in the sense of, hey, are we headed towards cap jail? Are we headed towards, there's been some lean years here in New Orleans that are pretty rough. We haven't quite gotten there yet. We haven't gotten to the point where, hey, I'm really concerned there are deals we can't get out of that we just have to deal with. I would say one would be if Von Miller doesn't come back, if he's not a still contributing good, impactful pass rusher, that one would hurt. From everything I've seen in the offseason workouts, I don't think that's going to be the case. The same thing, it looks like Tre'Davious White is looking pretty good. I think that Stephon Diggs is aging pretty well. I think that we're going to be in pretty good shape with most of those deals. We've seen Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer age pretty gracefully to this point. So at some point, we could get kind of, handcuffed to a deal that we can't get our way out of. There are some deals like that in New Orleans and some other teams who play around with the cap a lot. Los Angeles pretty much just had to give away Jalen Ramsey. They got a 3rd round pick and a backup tight end for Jalen Ramsey because that's how much they had messed up the cap to be able to be in that position. They gave away Allen Robinson, where they're paying Allen Robinson $13 million this year. And the Steelers are paying him $5 million this year. So they're paying for $13 million. They gave him cash. That wasn't even old cap hits. Their situation was so bad. They're paying more, almost triple what the Steelers are for Allen Robinson to play for the Steelers. So we haven't gotten to that point yet. We haven't gotten to that point where I'm super concerned about cap jail in the future. But like I pointed out, we do have a few deals where we're coming to the point where, hey, we can't keep restructuring that one. We can't keep kicking that can down the road. We can't keep extending. And I think we're almost there on Stephon Diggs. We have enough future stuff kicked out. I think we're there with Mitch Morris. I think we're there with a couple of those deals. And although Josh Allen is not that kind of thing, we've done so many restructures that at some point here, we need a season. The Chiefs did this last year with Patrick Mahomes, where they kind of had their take your medicine season was last year, where they did that and they didn't kick the can down the road further. At some point here, and I think it's 2 years from now, we're going to do that with Josh Allen. We're going to have a year where we just eat it and yep, it's a big scary number and it's $55-60 million and we just got to deal with it. So I think one of those is coming, and then a couple others where, hey, we just got to let some long time, really good, loyal players. We probably just need to let the contract expire and move on. Like what we're rolling the dice with the linebacker this year. One of the costs for what we've done is, we couldn't have all the nice, pretty things we've had everywhere else and another $18 million a year linebacker. We're going to need one of these guys to step up, and we'll see if it's Terrell Dodson or Terrell Bernard or Dorian Williams. But that's our downside right now. That's our worst case scenario is, hey, we now have a competition where there's been a backup who's gotten some run and 2 3rd-round picks, and we need one of those players to step up as a starter. That's our downside. That's our cap jail right now, is that we were only able to bring in the Leonard Floyds and the Poona Fords and the Connor McGoverns and the Deontay Hardys of free agency, not huge splashes on $20 million a year players. And we have to have one of the 2 3rd-round picks or the other backup step up as our starting middle linebacker. That's our current cap jail. And that's honestly what I expect over the next couple of years. There's a chance that next year, maybe we can't afford Gabe Davis and he leaves, and we're in a spot where we draft a receiver in the second round and we have that second round receiver and Khalil Shakir and Trent Sherfield and Deontay Hardy and one other like Taylor Rapp, Puna Ford, Damian Harris level free agent at receiver. And we bring in one more guy and we see, hey, let's see how that goes. And that, maybe we can be the reclamation spot for, heck, maybe it's Allen Robinson, a guy like that, his contract expires in Pittsburgh and maybe we try to bring him in and it's the guy. That's what our version of cap jail would be right now, is maybe having one spot each year where we kind of got to patch it together and see how it goes. But it's going to be with a premium draft pick and swing at a free agent and some other developing guys coming up that, yep, we got to hope that Khalil Shakir pans into a starting level receiver. That's not so bad. That's not so bad of a spot right now. And I think, Buffalo Dave talking about maybe it's shorter. Maybe we get a surprise. And that's where, again, I'll give Joe Marino another shout out for the show that I joined Joe on that aired today. The Kansas City Chiefs had 3 straight years with terrible drafts where literally no one contributed. There wasn't I think in 3 whole drafts, 2018, 2019, and 2020, they had one contributing player, that was Juan Thornhill, who now left in free agency and went to Cleveland. And he was that was the best player for 3 combined draft classes in 2018, 2019, and 2020. But when you have back-to-back classes that have, Creed Humphrey and Nick Bolton and their other guard Smith, and then last year, not a ton of superstar guys, but a bunch of contributors at a bunch of different spots that all look pretty good and were contributing. All of a sudden, it pans out a little bit better. So, yeah, we need some of that. We need some of these picks to hit. We need Kyer Elam to now step up as a really good contributor. We need one of Dorian Williams or Terrell Bernard to be a starter. We need Justin Shorter or Khalil Shakir to pan out. We need Osiris Torrance to be a starting level guy. We need Gregory Rousseau to step up to be like a, really big force opposite Von Miller and Leonard Floyd. So as some of those things happen, and then Dalton Kincaid is all of a sudden a game impacting pick. If all of a sudden this draft class is, one of those KC classes for Brennan Bean, that setup is going to be the kind of structure that can really slingshot the team forward and be able to keep us at the top of contention without having the money there. So that's what we've done now, is we're in that spot where, hey, when you're paying a franchise quarterback, it's a great problem to have, and you're going to be able to, set yourself up to where you can, continue to succeed. Hitting on draft picks becomes more valuable. Our awesome producer, Lauren, who is enjoying some time herself with her family now, with a nice message. Appreciate. She said if she was a GM, she'd go ahead and convert Greg's cap hit into guaranteed money 8 days a week. I appreciate that. I love guaranteed money. Guaranteed money is my favorite money. So I appreciate her converting my salary into guaranteed money. I hope Lauren's having a lovely evening. Tell everybody we said hello. So obviously this is kind of what I was hoping to do tonight, is just to go through here, share a little bit about where those different pieces go and how that works. I'll look through a couple other questions here, or maybe Chris can get star some of the good questions that are in the chat. And while Chris does that, I am going to take a shot at Chris's latest, diabolical effort to quiz me and see if he can stump me here with tonight's segment of Greg Doesn't Know. So here we go. Greg Doesn't Know. Let's kind of see what he has up his sleeve here this evening. The first question: in less than 30 seconds, convert the 2023 salary cap amount into Danish kroner. Okay. So, so going that direction. you'd have $1.52 B 1.53. No, you're not allowed to cheat the clock. 1.53. Yeah, that's right. Oh, all right. Okay. So
Are you kidding me? That's right. Who do you think you are? I am. Get it right.
so in full transparency, I did have to make sure I could look up what the US to the US dollar to Danish krona conversion was, but then I did the rest of the math in my head of what the 224 converted to. So I get partial credit for that one. All right. Which year saw the single biggest cap increase in the cap and cap by percentage, and how much? Whew. So I won't lie, I don't know a ton of the early years where they were establishing this. So I would probably go by I'm trying to think of the cycles of how long the TV contracts were and how far back that went. And it probably would have been at one of those big jumps. So it would be just a pure guess that one of the big deals, it, before the cap, I know that Fox jumped into play. I think that might have been before free agency and before the salary cap, but that would have been intriguing. So I'm going to guess it's 2006, but there might have been a year back in the 90s when those were first happening that was there. The increase was the direct result of a new TV deal, CBS, Fox, and ESPN. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, it was 98. That's a good question. I like that. In 1998, the cap went up by 10.9 million, all the way up to 52.29. Shows you how far we've gone. Since then, it's now 225 million, and it was 52 million back at that point. So the percentage increase that would be, equivalent having that kind of, a quarter of the cap going up. You're talking about right now having like a over a $50 million cap increase, which is there. So now next year, where we're talking about, we could see 26 to 30 million. That's still at the lower end of that. You're still talking about in like the teens percentage wise. So a big percentage increase, but nowhere near how huge of a leap that was back in 1998. So that's an interesting one. Good questions from Chris this time. I like that. All right. So back here, we'll kind of end it with some of the questions from the chat here as the last ones. So Burning Bob, what does it take for us to trade up for Marvin Harrison Jr.? I 100% agree. He looks like as can't miss of a prospect as I can remember. Like what seeing Larry Fitzgerald was at Pittsburgh, where people knew for multiple years beforehand that, hey, this guy's going to be awesome and he's going to be worth it. He's going to be a top draft pick. Even I guess like a Calvin Johnson or something like that. But that's really Calvin Johnson was such a physical freak. Marvin Harrison Jr. is just an amazing receiver and a really good athlete. So Larry Fitzgerald's the comp that keeps coming up in my mind. I genuinely don't think there's anything. And the reason is I actually went through this thought exercise with some fans asking during our 24 hours of madness with Stephon Diggs. People were asking like, hey, what would it take? And we were talking about the fact that the Bills had already paid Stephon Diggs so much cash. There's a ton of reasons other teams would want to trade for Stephon Diggs because they would take him on owing him like barely anything because the Bills had already paid him all the money. So he would be an awesome player to trade for. So we were kind of going through like, okay, it's not going to happen, but what would it take? And they were talking about, hey, you got back a receiver on a rookie contract plus 2 first-round picks. And I was honestly saying that, having the Bills pick and an extra pick next year and an extra future pick, like the Bills are going to be good again. They're going to be picking somewhere between 28th to 32nd, 25th to 32nd. Like they're going to be really, really good again. Even if you traded their pick from in the late 20s plus an extra pick, and I don't think one of the worst 5 teams in the NFL is trading for Diggs. So you have an extra one plus a future year. I don't think that gets you into the top 3. I really don't. Like, I think he's a top 5 pick at worst. Let's say some of the quarterbacks get raised up. I don't think he gets you there. I genuinely don't think there's any realistic path where we can, even if we wanted to mortgage the future and trade everything that's not bolted down, I don't think there's any realistic path where we could trade up high enough to get him. And, but he's worth it. I totally get why it would be there. Josh Allen is the next Elway. I appreciate the name here, saying 2025 will be a transition year. I think that's possible, although I'll say, in theory, last year was Kansas City's transition year. Kansas City traded away Tyreek Hill. They took took their medicine with Patrick Mahomes, and they had to play like 7 rookies at different spots throughout their roster. They didn't strategically do that because, hey, we know we're going to hit on all our draft picks. They had no choice. They didn't have any other veteran players to play at those spots. They had to play their rookies, and they were still really good, and they still won because guess why? They have Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce. Well, guess what? In 2025, we're still going to have Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs. We're still going to have really good players that'll actually be the same age as what Travis Kelce was. That's how old Diggs will be in that year. We're still going to have really talented players. So I don't think transition year is wrong. I agree. That's a year that I think we're going to have to kind of take some medicine and do the similar. And we probably do need to hit on some additional draft picks this year, next year, and maybe that year as well, to be able to really give some of that extra depth that we won't be able to afford to have as many depth players. But this year is a good example where it's kind of nice. We're one of those rosters now where guys signed for $1.77 million for the chance to come play with Josh Allen. They're going to keep doing that. So the cover's not going to be bare. So I don't think transition year is an incorrect term. I think that's probably accurate. We are going to have to take our medicine. I don't think people should see that as, we're going to have to rebuild, or, hey, we're going to have to, really, restock and be, 6-11. Like, we could be in a transition year and also still go 12-5 or 13-4. Like that. It's going to be that kind of team, and having Josh Allen always makes that possible. Awesome producer Chris saying here whether we should extend Greg Rousseau. Absolutely. I'm going to guarantee that we extend Gregory Rousseau. I do not think there's any possibility that we do not extend Gregory Rousseau. I think he's a great fit for the team. They're very happy. You guys, for anybody here who is questioning, Cover One has been pretty active in showing the value of Ed Oliver and that, hey, he hasn't been the superstar player we were hoping, but we also paid him as like the 17th best defensive tackle. And I'm okay paying him like that. Gregory Rousseau is playing better than Ed Oliver. We're going to extend him. He's going to get his money. I think it's going to be a pretty good chunk. I am torn. Josh Allen is the next Elway asking here about please extend Gabe Davis. I'm going to steal a statement from Sal Capaccio. I love Sal, does a great job. His show, It's Always Game Day in Buffalo with Matt Bove. He made a comment that really registered with me. And his comment was, we either extend Gabe Davis before the season starts this summer, or he's going to leave the team. I don't think that's far off. I do think that we have a window. Matter of fact, I can even say I know that they have exchanged communication on contract offers between the Buffalo Bills and Gabe Davis and his camp. I think there's a possibility that between now and training camp, or between now and before the first game, we extend Gabe Davis. I think it's absolutely possible. I think there could even be some karmic balance of maybe it's announced a day or two after DeAndre Hopkins signs with somebody else. And that we could then extend Gabe Davis, and because we're keeping that, candle lit just in case for DeAndre Hopkins. However, if we don't, I do think he would have every right to want to see what his value is on the market. And if he does, similar to Tremaine Edmonds, I think he would get offered more than what we'd want to pay. And that at that point, we would have already made multiple offers to him, and we'd get to that point and need to be able to build that up. So I'm curious where that would go, but I don't think Sal's far off in that. I think we got a pretty good chance to extend Gabe Davis proactively. And if we don't, I kind of think he's going to test the market and not come back. So we'll see where that goes. I like Gabe Davis, but we'll see where those things go. Rick's head hurts and he needs ibuprofen. I can recommend some. Face of the bear here. How many years will Bean be GM if he's continually successful? Brandon Bean's a young man. Brandon Bean's in his 40s. He very legitimately could be a GM for 20 more years. That's not crazy. 15 more years for sure. We've had some pretty long standing, John Schneider's been in Seattle for quite a long time. We have some long standing general managers. Bill Belichick's been running the Patriots for 20 years, 25 almost. So if he's successful, ultimately, if the Bills win a Super Bowl, they're going to build a statue of McDermott and Bean and Josh, and they're going to be here forever as long as they want. So if we get one, and then they continue being the kind of team we are now with double-digit wins and winning the division most of the time and continue to just be successful, but we get the one out of the way to relieve all that pressure, I don't think it's crazy at all that we see for sure 10 more years. I don't think that's crazy. And Jared with a very kind comment here. I want to know where he learned all this. So one, I joke all the time. I still remember phone numbers from third grade. Numbers stick with me. I remember numbers. I memorize numbers. I'm not, Rain Man. I'm not a perfect mind and things like that, but I can do, college level algebra in my head. I'm able to do quick math in my head. That's a bonus. I can't remember what my wife just asked me to go do now. I forget people's names 30 seconds after they tell them to me. I walk into rooms all the time and have no clue why I'm in the room and what I went up there for. But, I can rattle off the top of my head that Ed Oliver's cap number is now $4.9768 million. I don't know why. It just sticks. Also, I've always leaned into numbers with my love of sports. So my favorite video game when they went from Tecmo Bowl to Tecmo Super Bowl was because you could track the statistics. I love playing Madden and I like franchise mode more than playing the games. I loved being able to do those things and going through there. Professionally, I do a lot of financial analysis, read a lot of contracts, and am on the borderline side of kind of what a tax attorney does from imports and exports. So I also have to read a lot of legalese and boring paperwork, so I'm used to it. So I've actually read the NFL CBA and have gone through and forced myself to understand it. Then through repetition, I learn all the different tips and tricks and ways that you can utilize different things. I use websites and resources. I have learned to follow a lot of really smart people on Twitter and on different sites. I use sites like Over the Cap and SpotTrack.com. And then as you immerse yourself in it, you get better at projecting contracts. You get better at being able to learn what we think we're going to do. And now obviously, I've gotten, good at educated guessing and then gotten lucky with a few. I think I hit Leonard Floyd's literally down to like the third decimal place, exactly what his salary and signing bonus were going to be. Some of the different pieces there, I hit Matt Milano's exactly. I hit Deion Dawkins really, really close. I've hit a lot of really sharp numbers, like right on to what I expected them to be. But it's just deduction. It's just that, hey, I've seen enough patterns of this. I've been able to look at, okay, hey, there's only so many options available. So let's use Leonard Floyd. So the rumors came out that it was going to be a base of $7 million. Well, I knew they didn't mean base salary because there's no way we were going to use that cap number. So I looked, hey, he's been in the league for 8 years. The minimum salary for an 8-year veteran in the NFLPA is $1.165 million. So I was like, all right, well, we'll probably put it all the way down to the minimum. What does that leave if we're going to pay him $7 million? Well, if it's 1.165, that means that we got to pay him a signing bonus of 5.835. So that's what would add together for 7 million. So I bet it's going to be a $5.835 million signing bonus. And then I bet that we stretch it out over some void years. I did miss, I guess we would use four void years, and we only use 3. But that's all I did is work backwards from that to be able to go in that. I kind of figured that, hey, these are the options available to Brandon Beane. I'm guessing at this point of the offseason, we have to lean all the way to that side of it. And that I just work backwards from those numbers to figure out, hey, I bet this is how we go and structure it. I bet you we add in some incentives that let him earn some more money, but they're probably going to be not likely to be earned incentives because he didn't hit 10 sacks last year and he didn't hit 12. So those don't count against the cap. Those are the ways and the paths that I take to be able to build some of these things, and how over time I've learned how to do it and be able to do this. So some of it I'm fortunate that math is a skill for me, and then on top of that, just a lot of repetition and a lot of doing it over and over and over again. All right, guys. This was a lot of fun. I really, really appreciate all the time and everybody sitting here. I've now rambled all by myself for an hour, so that's plenty for me tonight. I really appreciate our awesome producer, Chris, put together some fun questions for me here, and I appreciate all you guys sitting here being able to ask all these questions, go through all these different things. Do me a big favor. It would mean a lot. Please press the like button. Even take a minute to leave a comment. Let me know questions that you have. I'd love to answer some questions in the YouTube comments specifically. That really helps the algorithm. My new show here, the Greg Tompsett Sports Show, is just getting started. So like the algorithm doesn't know who to push it out to and who to check it out with yet. So it really goes a long ways. If you like, give a rating, give a review, be able to leave a comment, that goes a long ways at like pushing it out to more people. So I work really hard to be able to give you guys this information. And that's the biggest thank you I can ask for, is just take a minute to press that like button, be able to leave a comment, ask me a question. I promise I'll go through and answer all of them. So if you have any other questions I didn't get a chance to be able to touch on here live while we were talking, I'd be happy. I promise I'll go through and answer all of them in the YouTube chat. So make sure to ask me one there. But this has been a ton of fun. I really, really appreciate you guys. And this has been a great way to be able to spend our Friday evening, and now go enjoy some fun family time with everybody here this weekend. So appreciate it. Thank you to Chris. Thank you for everybody else here. But on behalf of Cover One and everybody here, we are